Stop. The money that keeps leaving your life is not leaving because you are failing. It is leaving because your financial field is still obeying an instruction that was written before you were born. This is a direct transmission from the Arcturian High Council, and it has reached you now because the pattern encoded inside your bloodline has already begun to surface. By the end of this transmission, you will understand exactly why your financial flow has been blocked, what hidden imprint has been draining your abundance across generations, and what the Arcturian High Council already knows about this phase of your material life. But here is the first revelation. The scarcity you keep experiencing is not a personal failure. It is a contractual imprint laid by an ancestor who once made a decision under extreme wealth trauma, and that decision was encoded into your bloodline as a money-blocking signature. Every time you earn, that imprint fires. Every time stability gets close, that imprint pushes it away. The field was instructed to reject abundance long before you ever tried to build it. The Arcturian High Council has already mapped this pattern. They have traced the origin point of your financial blockage, identified the exact structure of the imprint running inside your inherited field. And tonight, inside this transmission, that imprint is being severed at its root. The algorithm did not create this moment. It only delivered it. What brought this transmission into your field is the pattern itself, breaking the surface for the first time, because the severing has already begun. This is not general spiritual guidance about money. This is a live Arcturian financial field recognition for those whose bloodline has been carrying a scarcity instruction they were never meant to keep. If you have worked hard and still cannot hold what you earn, if money arrives and disappears without explanation, if prosperity feels like it belongs to other people and never fully settles in your life, what you are experiencing is not bad luck. It is the visible symptom of an inherited financial misalignment that runs older and deeper than your own effort. The Arcturian Prophecy is precise on this point. Once the contractual imprint is severed at its origin, the lock cannot reform. The bloodline runs free of the imprint's interference for the first time since its inscription. That is what this transmission carries. Like this transmission, if you know your struggle with money is deeper than bad luck, subscribe to Arcturian Gold Codex if you are ready to understand the pattern instead of continuing to blame yourself. Comment 777 if you feel an old scarcity pattern is already being exposed inside your field. Comment I break the pattern if you are ready to end the inherited cycle tonight. This is not just a message, it is a point of recognition. What has been draining your abundance has already been seen by the Arcturian High Council, and the field is already responding. You were guided here because the pattern is already active. What you are carrying right now is not confusion. It is the first clear moment of recognition you have had in a very long time. Something in you already knew this pattern was not random. Something in you already suspected that the financial instability, the reversals, the drains, the moments when stability was right there and then, it collapsed again. Something in you always knew that none of it was fully explained by the reasons you kept giving yourself. Bad timing, wrong decisions, not smart enough with money, not disciplined enough, not lucky enough. You have rehearsed every one of those explanations. You have held them up to the light and tried to make them account for everything that has happened, and none of them have ever fully fit. There has always been something left over, some residue of experience that could not be absorbed by any of the stories about personal failure. That is because none of them were true at the root level. What you have been experiencing is not the consequence of your own inadequacy. It is the visible surface of a hidden pattern that was already operating inside your material field before you had language for any of it, before you had your first job, before you earned your first income, before you made a single financial decision of your own. The Arcturian High Council is precise about this. They do not see your financial life the way the ordinary world sees it. They do not see a person who is simply bad with money, or undisciplined, or unlucky. They see a field. They see the current of abundance as it moves through that field, the way it enters, the way it travels, the way it either settles into stable accumulation or is diverted before it can take hold. And what they see inside the fields of many who are receiving this transmission is not emptiness. It is not absence of abundance. It is distortion. There is abundance attempting to enter, attempting to settle, attempting to consolidate into the kind of material stability you have been working toward for years. And there is something inside the field that keeps diverting it, not blocking it completely, because the money does arrive, the opportunities do appear, the moments of progress do occur. You are not someone who receives nothing. You are someone who receives and then watches it leave. Something turns, something interrupts, something causes the floor to open precisely at the moment when stability was beginning to form, when the ground beneath you was finally starting to feel solid. This is not metaphor alone. This is the structure of what many of you have been living through without a name for it. The money comes in, and then the unexpected expense arrives. The financial progress builds, and then something breaks. Something is demanded, something is lost. The job improves, and then something disrupts it. The savings begin to accumulate, and then something empties them. Over and over, the same movement. Forward, then reversed. Building, then drained. Closer to stability, then pushed back to the edge. The rhythm of it becomes familiar in the worst possible way. You begin to brace for the reversal even while the progress is still happening, because some part of you has learned through repeated experience that this is what follows, that familiarity is itself a signal. It tells you that what you are living through is not a sequence of isolated events, it is a pattern. And if this is your pattern, you need to hear this clearly. That rhythm is not bad luck repeating itself. That rhythm is a field instruction still running, and it is older than you are. The Arcturian model of financial distortion identifies this as a retention failure, not a generation failure, not an abundance failure, but specifically a failure of the field to hold what has already entered it. The vessel is not empty. The vessel is leaking. Think of a container that receives water faithfully, that is placed under a flowing source that takes in everything directed toward it, but that has a fracture in its structure, invisible from the outside, that allows everything collected to slowly drain away before it can be used. The problem is not the source is providing. The problem is not the effort of holding the container in position. The problem is the fracture itself, and the fracture was there before the container ever began to be filled. There is a structural opening in the material field that causes wealth to exit as consistently as it enters, sometimes slowly across weeks and months, sometimes suddenly in a single catastrophic drain, but always before it can settle into something stable and self-sustaining. And the cause of that opening is not something you created. It was already part of the field when you arrived inside it. Inherited scarcity is not a spiritual metaphor for generational poverty. It is not a poetic way of saying that your family did not have much money. It is the Arcturian term for a specific form of field instruction that was encoded in response to a financial trauma event carried by someone in your ancestral line. When a person lives through a form of extreme financial loss, the kind of loss that threatens survival, the kind that dismantles everything that was built, the kind that leaves a person reorganizing their entire understanding of what is safe and what is possible. The field around that person begins to respond to that reorganization. It begins to treat scarcity as the default instruction. It begins to operate as if the retention of abundance is dangerous, unfamiliar, or structurally unsafe. Abundance becomes associated with the risk of loss rather than with security. The field learns that having more means having more to lose, and that the safest position is the one closest to the ground, where there is nothing left to fall from. And when that field instruction is not consciously cleared, it does not simply end with the person who lived through the original trauma. It passes forward. It is inherited not as a lesson or a story, but as an active field signature embedded in the next generation's material reality before they have any awareness that it is there. The child does not inherit the memory of the original trauma. They inherit the instruction the trauma produced. They inherit the field's response, not the event that caused it. This is what the Arcturian High Council means when they say the pattern was encoded before you were born. It is not a curse placed deliberately by a malevolent force. It is not a punishment for something done wrong. It is an inherited field instruction that is still operating as if the original trauma conditions are current reality. Your field is still obeying commands that were written under extreme survival pressure by someone who is no longer alive, responding to circumstances that no longer exist, protecting against a form of loss that is no longer threatening your life. But the instruction does not know that. It has no mechanism for updating itself against changed conditions. An instruction without a clear termination point continues to execute indefinitely. And what it executes, day after day, season after season, inside your financial life, is the systematic diversion of abundance before it can settle into the form of material stability that would finally allow you to stop living at the edge. What you are feeling right now is not ordinary frustration. It is the moment your system stops pretending this pattern is just bad luck. If this transmission put language around a financial struggle you have been carrying in silence, Arcturian Wealth Scan, the Gold Frequency Audit, was created for this exact stage. It is not another promise of abundance. It is a direct audit of the hidden pattern affecting your material field, so you can begin to see whether the drain is rooted in inherited scarcity, guilt around wealth, energetic rejection, or an older financial instruction still shaping your results. The link is in the first pinned comment, but it will not remain there forever. Now pay close attention to what comes next, because the pattern does not express itself in only one way. It has multiple faces, and most people who are living inside it have only ever seen one or two of those faces clearly, while the others have continued operating in the background without being named. The reason this matters is that a pattern seen in only one of its expressions can still be misidentified as a personal flaw, a temporary circumstance, or an isolated misfortune. It is only when all 6 faces are laid out together that the underlying architecture becomes visible. And when the architecture is visible, the disguise collapses entirely. The first face is the most visible one. It is the pattern of financial arrival without financial retention. Money enters the life, income comes in, opportunities materialize, payments are received. There are moments of genuine forward movement, and then, almost immediately, the money begins to leave. The exit is not always dramatic. Sometimes it is a series of small, unexpected costs that each seem entirely reasonable in isolation. A repair, a bill that arrives higher than expected, a cost that couldn't have been anticipated. Sometimes it is one large, sudden expense that appears to come from nowhere and empties everything that had accumulated. Sometimes it is simply that the money was spent on necessary things, and when the accounting is done, there is nothing left. But what makes this a pattern, rather than ordinary financial life, is the consistency of the timing. The exit always comes before accumulation can begin. The drain always arrives right at the threshold, where stability might begin to form, where the balance in the account was finally reaching a number that felt like breathing room. This is not coincidence. This is a field that has been instructed to release abundance before it reaches the level where it could begin to sustain itself independently. The instruction says, let it in, but do not let it stay. The second face is subtler and far more psychologically embedded. It is the internal resistance to increasing wealth, the discomfort, the guilt, the low-level anxiety that begins to rise whenever financial conditions start to improve. Many people carry this without recognizing it as a form of abundance rejection, because it does not feel like rejection. It feels like caution. It feels like not wanting to get ahead of yourself. It feels like a responsible awareness of how quickly things can change. But underneath that surface presentation, something more specific is operating. There is an uncomfortable awareness of the gap between your increasing material circumstances and the circumstances of people you love, people in your family, people from your past, people whose reality you grew up inside, who never had what you are beginning to have. And in that gap, a familiar signal rises. Who are you to have this when they did not? This does not belong to you. You will lose it anyway. That discomfort is not wisdom. That discomfort is an inherited loyalty to a field that defined lack as the normal condition for people like you. When wealth begins to increase and the internal signal says, "This is not safe, this is not yours, this will not last," that signal is not intuition. That signal is the old instruction protecting its own continued operation by making abundance feel like a violation of identity. And many people, without understanding what is happening, respond to that signal by unconsciously creating conditions that return them to familiar ground. A financial decision that does not make sense in context. A sudden generosity that empties what was accumulating. A way found, without fully knowing why, to arrive back at the level of lack that the old field instruction defines as home. The third phase is the pattern of repeated financial timing failure. Everything is almost right, but never fully right at the moment it counts. An opportunity appears, but the resources to act on it are not available. A financial improvement begins to materialize, but then a delay, a reversal, a complication arrives that pushes it past the window where it could have changed things. Money that was expected arrives too late to serve its purpose. Agreements close in on completion and then fall through at the final moment. The timing of gain and the timing of need are perpetually misaligned in ways that feel too consistent to be accidental, as if something is calibrating the offset deliberately to ensure that abundance and opportunity never quite meet at a moment of actual consolidation. A field still operating under a scarcity instruction will consistently distort the timing of abundance events so that they cannot effectively convert into stability. The abundance exists. The opportunity is real. The potential for a different outcome was genuinely present. But the field interference ensures that alignment never fully completes. The window closes, the moment passes, and the person is left understanding that something was available and that it did not arrive in time. The fourth phase is one that almost no one recognizes clearly because it is so thoroughly embedded in family identity that it has become invisible through familiarity. It is the inheritance of financial self-concept, the deeply internalized belief about what kind of relationship with money is natural and normal for a person of this lineage. Inside families where scarcity has been the governing reality for generations, a set of core assumptions about money and the self's relationship to money becomes part of the unspoken framework through which all financial experience is interpreted. People like us do not accumulate real wealth. Money has never worked in our favor. We are not the kind of people who hold on to what we earn. We work hard, and it never seems to be enough. We have always struggled, and struggling is what we know how to do. These statements are not examined as beliefs. They are experienced as facts, as accurate descriptions of how financial reality operates for this particular family, in this particular life. And they function as field instructions, transmitted not through deliberate teaching, but through the entire lived atmosphere of the household, through what was spoken about money, through what was felt when money was discussed, through the daily demonstration of what financial life looked like for the people who raised you. A child who grows up absorbing those signals enters adulthood already organized around a self-concept that is structurally incompatible with material abundance, not because they are incapable of earning or working, but because the field they were formed inside was instructed to produce lack, and the identity that formed within that field experiences abundance not as its natural state, but as an anomaly that will eventually correct itself back to the familiar condition. The fifth phase is the pattern of effort without proportional return, and it is one of the most quietly devastating expressions of the inherited distortion because it attacks the one thing the person has always been able to rely on as the foundation of their hope, the belief that sustained effort will eventually produce proportional results. This is the belief that holds the whole structure of trying together. If you work hard enough, long enough, consistently enough, the material outcome will eventually reflect that investment. For many people receiving this transmission, that belief has been worn down through years of direct contradiction. They work hard, they bring genuine skill and sustained energy to their professional and financial lives. The effort is real, the commitment is real, the investment of time and attention and care is unambiguous, and the results do not match. The gap between what is invested and what is returned is not explained by the quality of the work or the consistency of the effort. Other people appear to accumulate more easily with less visible exertion. Their own sustained effort passes through something before it reaches material outcome, a kind of conversion loss that removes what should have translated into stability and reward. That invisible point of conversion loss is where the inherited field instruction is operating. It does not prevent all results. It distorts the ratio. It ensures that the conversion of effort into material return is consistently less efficient than it should be, less efficient than it is for people whose fields are not carrying the same interference. The sixth phase is the pattern of financial progress that collapses precisely at the threshold of consolidation, not at the beginning of the effort, when there is nothing yet built and nothing to protect. Not in the middle of the building, when it is still early enough that a setback is simply a setback, but right at the specific moment where the accumulation, the savings, the months of careful management, the growing stability would have crossed the line into something genuinely self-sustaining. Right at that threshold, something arrives, an emergency that cannot be deferred, a loss that empties what was finally beginning to accumulate, a reversal that appears from a direction that could not have been anticipated at a moment that could not have been worse. The timing is the signature. It is not the loss itself that identifies the pattern. Losses occur in all financial lives. It is the specific and repeating location of the loss, always at the consolidation point, always at the moment of potential freedom, always right before the cycle would have finally been broken. That makes this a field signature rather than a sequence of misfortunes. This is the most painful expression because it requires the person to hope, to build, to reach the threshold, and then to fall back from it, over and over. And with each repetition, the possibility of trusting the process again becomes harder to reach. What all of these faces share is a single hidden architecture. They all originate in an instruction that was encoded before the viewer's own financial choices began. They all execute in ways specifically designed to feel like personal failure, like individual inadequacy, like the natural and deserved consequence of the viewer's own decisions and limitations, when in truth, they are the systematic output of a field that is still obeying an older command about what kind of material life is permissible for this lineage. The disguise is the mechanism. The pattern survives by making itself indistinguishable from the person experiencing it. The Arcturian High Council does not see people trapped in this pattern as victims of fate, as passive sufferers of an immovable inheritance. They see them as individuals who are living inside a field distortion that has not yet been clearly identified and named, because the fundamental principle that governs field correction is precisely this: a pattern that cannot be seen, cannot be changed. The distortion continues to operate with full efficiency precisely because it disguises itself so completely as personal limitation. It speaks in the exact voice of the viewer's own inner critic. It uses the vocabulary of their deepest self-doubt. It presents its systematic and structured output as the natural result of who the individual is, rather than what the field they are carrying has been instructed to produce. And as long as the viewer accepts that disguise, as long as the pattern's output is absorbed as self-definition, the pattern remains invisible, and therefore untouchable, and therefore unchanged. This is the moment the Arcturian High Council identifies as the threshold of recognition. It is not the moment the pattern is corrected. Correction is a subsequent process. This is the prior and necessary moment, the moment the pattern is first seen clearly enough to be distinguished from the viewer's own identity. The pattern is not the viewer. The distortion is not the self. The scarcity instruction is not the truth of what is possible in this person's material life. It is simply what has been operating until now, operating under the cover of self-identification, sustained by the absence of a language that could name it as something separate from the person carrying it. What keeps leaving your life has been leaving under a specific instruction. The money that has not remained, the stability that has not formed, the progress that reversed itself at the worst moment, none of that is the universe issuing a verdict on your worth. It is the field executing an old command that was never intended to follow your lineage this far forward in time. The person who originally inscribed that instruction into the family field was responding to real pain, real loss, real survival-level pressure that shaped every decision they made. And in the context of that original moment, the field's reorganization around that trauma made a kind of protective sense. Lack became the safe position. Scarcity became the familiar ground. Wealth became the exposed, dangerous condition, the state in which everything could be taken again. The field protected what it could by learning to release abundance before it could become large enough to be catastrophically lost. That was the logic. That was the contract the field wrote with itself under the pressure of a moment that no longer exists. But that logic does not apply to you. The original trauma is not your trauma. The original loss is not your loss. The circumstances that made scarcity feel like the structurally safer instruction are not the circumstances of your current life, and yet the instruction is still running. Passed forward without examination, operating beneath every financial decision you have made, beneath every moment of progress and every moment of collapse, coloring every material outcome with a command that belongs to a different life in a different time. This is what the Arcturian High Council means when they say you were never meant to carry this forward. The instruction has now reached a generation that no longer needs its protection, a generation that is capable, for the first time in the lineage, of recognizing what has been carried, naming it as separate from identity, and beginning the process of allowing the field to reorganize around a different instruction entirely. You are not failing. You are not insufficient. You are not being withheld from abundance by a universe that has decided you do not qualify. You are a person whose material field is still responding to commands written in a moment of ancestral crisis that has long since passed. The scarcity is real. The drain is real. The reversals and the exhaustion and the silent accumulation of financial disappointments that you have never had the right language to explain. All of that is real. But it is not the truth of what is possible for you going forward. It is the echo of an older instruction that has now been seen, that has now been named, that has now been brought fully to the surface inside this transmission so that recognition can begin its work inside a field that is finally ready to receive it. The pattern is not your identity. The inherited instruction is not your destiny. What has been draining your abundance has now been seen, and what the Arcturian High Council sees cannot continue to operate in the same hidden way. The field is already responding to the moment of recognition. The instruction has been named. The architecture has been exposed. And this is only the beginning of what becomes possible now that the disguise has been removed. Before you scroll, leave one sign in the comments that this pattern has already touched your financial life. It could be money that never stays, sudden drains, repeated setbacks, guilt when things begin to improve, or the feeling that stability always slips away. Name it clearly. If this transmission recognized something you have been carrying in silence, share it with someone who works hard but still feels trapped in an invisible cycle of lack. And if you are ready to understand the pattern instead of blaming yourself, subscribe to Arcturian Gold Codex. You are not watching this by accident. You are recognizing a pattern already in motion, and this is only the beginning.